Welcome to In Substantia. I'm your host, Gabor Farkas. When you hear the words Europe's rearmament, what comes to mind? A Cold War flashback? Tanks rumbling through black and white newsreels? Well, think again. This isn't a history lecture. After World War II, Europe rebuilt not just its cities, but its defenses, leaning heavily on help from across the Atlantic. The Marshall Plan, NATO, the United States became Europe's security backbone. For decades, that arrangement worked. Europe thrived, defense budgets shrank, and the idea of preparing for war quietly slipped into the background. Then came 2022. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a shock to the system. It showed just how vulnerable Europe had become and just how dependent it still was on American power. Fast forward to today. In 2025, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen launched Rearm Europe, later renamed Readiness 2030, a plan to raise an eye-watering $800 billion over 4 years for joint military investments and higher national spending. The questions are enormous. What happens if the US steps back from NATO? Can Europe truly agree on a common defense strategy? And how do we make sense of bigger military budgets when so many other urgent priorities compete for the same resources? To explore these questions, I'm joined by reservist Brigadier General Dr. Salvador Sánchez Tapia, a military strategist, an academic, and an expert civil-military relations. He's someone who's seen the realities of war and understands the theories behind it. Let's get into it. To begin, how should I call you? Should I call you Salvador, General? What is your, how should I call you?
You can call me Salvador. My friends also call me Sal. Up to you, Gabor.
Okay, so here we go. Speaking of your time in uniform and now in the classroom, that experience must give you a rare perspective on how military thinking and academic analysis inform one another. You've served as Brigadier General in the Spanish Army, and now you teach and do research at the University of Navarra. Can you tell us a bit about your journey from military life to academia? What drew you into research and public debate?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I feel privileged for being at your podcast. Well, my case was the result of a smooth transition. As you have said, I'm a latecomer in academia. I'm a professional soldier. In 2008, my army sent me to the US Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I graduated from that institution. I got a master's degree in security and strategic studies. And then piggybacking from that experience, my army decided to keep me 3 more years there in the faculty of the US Army War College teaching exactly this, security and strategy. And that was a life-changing experience for me because I realized while teaching US and international senior officers that this is what I wanted to do after leaving active duty. This is my current situation. Before retiring, we in the Spanish military spent some years in the reserve, and then I decided that this is what I wanted to do to fill my time during my years in the reserve. So this is how I came to academia. Then to prepare for this transition, I completed a PhD on civil-military relations at the University of Navarra under the advice of a good friend of mine, Dr. Marybeth Ulrich, who's currently teaching in the US Naval War College. And then I completed my PhD, and that was the step that allowed me to start teaching at University of Navarra. And this is where I am now teaching conflict analysis and international security and geopolitics at the University of Navarra. So it was a smooth but long transition between active duty and academia.
And you cited a few themes. Are there particular themes that keep on coming back that you focus on in your work that you're more worried about?
Well, yes, actually, civil-military relations is one of my main concerns. But I'm starting to work with another topic which is very relevant today, which is the potential nuclearization of Europe. Now that we are in this particular strategic environment in Europe, some European powers are reconsidering their nuclear posture. And then it is something that it's worth researching on now, on the potential, the possible nuclearization of Europe. And also I'm interested in geopolitics. This is something that I'm also teaching at Navarra, and I'm busy with drafting a geopolitics manual for my students in Navarra. So I would say these three fields keep coming back. I mean, are interesting for me now.
If I'm not mistaken, your doctoral research looked at civil-military relations in Spain. What did you find most surprising or important in that work? And do you think those insights still apply to the European context today?
Yeah, I think so. Well, first of all, I found many interesting things through my research. Well, first, I mean, many of them may seem obvious, but to me were eye-openers in a way. One of my main conclusion is that healthy civil-military relations, what I mean by healthy is civil-military relations that are subject to a democratic pattern. Is that these healthy civil-military relations are based on two main pillars. One is a non-partisanship of the military, and the second is the civilian supremacy, or the subordination of the military to legitimate, democratically elected civilian leadership. I also realized that the key to the health of civil-military relations pattern is a balance between what Huntington defined as two imperatives, professional and societal imperative. Huntington is well known because of his seminal work on civil-military relations, the soldier and the state. And in that book, he defined two imperatives, the professional and the societal ones, which have to be in balance in order to have healthy democratic CMR, civil-military relations. While the professional imperative pushes the armed forces to strive for maximum effectiveness, the societal imperative puts limits to this military trend, because the societal imperative is telling the military how far a society is willing to go to achieve the maximum effectiveness in the military. So each nation must strike its own peculiar CMR balance. And I think this is very relevant, not only for the Spanish case, but for Europe and generally speaking for any military force of any given state.
So what is your assessment? What does that look like in a current European setting?
I think, yes, it is relevant. By and large, all Western European democracies adjust to a democratic pattern of civil-military relations. All European nations understand that the military forces must be subordinated to civilian authority. This is something that is not questioned by any military in Europe. But having said that, there are nuances among European nations, and those nuances derive from their particular historical experience. So in the case of Spain, our civil-military relations pattern is very much the legacy of the 40-some years of Franco's dictatorship, plus the years of the transition to a democratic regime, with the hiccup of the failed coup d'etat in 1981. This was determinant to fix the current CMR pattern in Spain. If you go to the United Kingdom or Greece, you will find that their pattern has very much to do with their historical experience. In the case of the UK, by the fact also of being an island, and therefore of having a different sense of security, different certainly to our experience as a continental country. Or in the case of Greece, it has very much to do with the tense relationship the country maintains with Turkey. So there are nuances based on this, but again, I think that generally speaking, all countries adjust to democratic standards of civil-military relations.
That takes us to, I think, an important theme. We should talk about ethics. If trust between the military and societies is partly about how power is exercised, then ethical leadership becomes central. In one of your papers, you outline a framework for analyzing civil-military relations in democratic societies. Could you walk us through that model in simple terms?
Yes. Well, actually, the objective in my research was that of defining a pattern, a generic pattern, a model of ideal CMRs, which could then be used to assess the quality of CMRs in any country. And this is a thing I'm starting to do now, is trying to apply this pattern to a collection of countries. So that was the intention. So I did that by defining 4 different areas of manifestations of CMRs. Well, the first area I defined was military autonomy. When I mean autonomy, when I say that, I mean that the degree, how the military, the armed forces are able to self-govern its internal affairs. And things like promotions, punishments, justice, allocation of posts, etc. There is not, in democratic regimes, there is not such a thing as an autonomous military, because the militaries always, by definition, depend from the government. They are subordinated to the government. What I mean by autonomy is this leeway the soldiers have to self-regulate their profession. This is one area. The second is participation of the military in the definition of security strategy. That definition of security strategy is a political responsibility. I would dare to say that it's the key responsibility of any democratic state, because it is the main deliverable of a democratic state is security for its citizens. And this process of defining strategy happens at what technicians call the civil-military nexus. Is the place where civilians and soldiers interface. Democracies deserve vetted, complete, comprehensive security strategies, and that requires and demands that the military, the soldier, the technician, the professional is given a voice and is heard in the crafting of the strategy. Of course, the final decision falls in the hands of politicians, but the professionals have to be heard. So this was the second area I wanted to measure to assess the quality of democratic CMR. The third is the relationship between the military and the civilian society, because at the end of the day, CMR is a triangular relationship between soldiers, politicians, and civilian, the civil society. This is not my finding. This is, this is Clausewitz's finding, we can say, but it's true. I think it's also necessary and important to measure, to gauge how good or how bad or how intense or how weak this relationship is. And the last area measures military non-partisanship. Most militaries, we are, as in Huntington's war, we are politically sterile. We are neutral. We are non-partisan, but again, this non-partisanship principle finds different nuances in different countries. And this is also that was the 4th pillar I was measuring in my model. Then, after having defined these 4 areas, then I define a number of indicators to assess where the ideal balance between these imperatives I defined earlier where the right or the ideal balance lies. Having done that, then I was in a position to define an ideal CMR pattern. And then the pattern in each nation had to be compared against this ideality to identify deviations, and if you do a year-on-year analysis, to identify trends. Is the system improving? Is it deteriorating? Etc. etc. This is the whole philosophy behind this model.
So what are the warning signs when these relations start to break down? Can you give us examples?
Well,
recent?
Well, you may find cases of or not publicly justified dismissals of military leaders. For instance, in the United States, President Trump replaced the chairman of the Joint Chiefs under suspicion of wokeism, because he said that his assumption was that the leadership or the military establishment was manipulating or was instilling into the military the woke values, which allegedly are against military ones. That could be an indicator of civil-military friction, incidents like this, right? So dismissals, or if the military abuses its, or for better say, if politicians abuse the military for partisan interest. Another case, I'm not saying it's the case, but it could be, again, if we go to the United States, if President Trump decides to organize a military parade, which is a novelty in the U.S., with the argument that the U.S. must celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, then he organizes a military parade in which the country shows off its military power. For some political sectors, this might indicate political use of the military for partisan or with partisan intention. So we have to look at this kind of indicators to assess if there is a deterioration on the pattern.
Yes, on that note, given the coverage that this parade received, it's hard to know if it's Trump who comes out bad or if it's the military that comes out bad. You've written about the ethical responsibilities of armed forces. In today's world, with so many hybrid conflicts and blurred front lines, how can military institutions hold to a clear ethical compass?
No, that's a very relevant question, Gabor. I think you have to instill ethical values in soldiers, one soldier at a time. I mean, it is essential. I mean, you cannot. It is key for an ethical military, or for better say, a military is only as ethical as its weakest member, because being ethical is an individual is a matter. So you need soldiers who are properly trained and taught in ethical values, in the ethical behavior of a military. This is essential. So to me, the key to achieve that goal lies in education and training. So you have to introduce in all education, in all curricula, in the military academies, in all training programs, you have to introduce this element of ethics, individual ethics. So you have to build soldiers who are reared in this, in a deep sense of the ethics of being a soldier. Unfortunately, this is something that actually, when a soldier comes to the military, it's a little bit too late. Values instruction or instruction in ethics should be done at the earliest possible stage in human life, and that normally happens within the family. This is the environment in which a soldier has to learn, or a person has to learn, its key values. Because at the end of the day, military values are not different to civilian ones. We only intensify certain ones because of our particular business, but a soldier has to be ethical 360 degrees, not just in certain values. So I think key is in education. But of course, you need a clear code, a clear standard. And this is something we in the military have. in the case of Spain, we have the Royal Ordinances, which is a code of conduct, which tells us, well, this is a compass to orient our ethical behavior. So these ordinances, this code has to be taught, has to be brought to the soldier for them to learn. And then there should be, of course, a system in place to punish or to correct deviations in behavior and to foster and promote ethical leadership. So those who are not only technically proficient but also ethically sound are to be promoted. So this is a way to enforce ethics into the military, because the best way to teach and to learn ethics is through the example of leaders. So with all these things, I think this is how militaries grow as an ethical organization. Something that, as you suggest, Gabor, I think is key for current, at least for our military forces.
Let's shift now to what brought us to this conversation, Europe's rearmament. It's no longer just theoretical. It's backed by serious money and real commitments. But it's also full of tensions. In March 2025, the European Commission launched Rearm Europe, which was later renamed Readiness 2030. It's an 800 billion plan to strengthen Europe's defenses. What's your take? Do you see this as a bold strategic shift or more of a political signal?
Well, I think this is something that had to be done, but I don't think it is transformative. The very realization of the change of the name from rearmament to what the original name was Rearm to Readiness 2030 is indicative of where Europe stands in defense, because the name was changed because it was perceived by many Europeans as too aggressive. This speaks volumes about where we stand in security in Europe. I think the document is very good. I think it's a good step in the right direction. But I also think is the recognition of the fact that we have been neglecting for decades our defense, and that now we are in fact disarmed in face of clearly distinguishable threats. So it is the recognition that something has to be done if we want to, as a continent, or as a union, if you will, to play a role in the transformation of the international system we are witnessing today. If we want actually to have a voice, and if we want that voice to be heard internationally, because the other option is just dragging behind the emerging powers and just following orders from others. So it is a very necessary document, but it is limited also because internally there is not unanimity as to how we should proceed. So the European Union is doing all it can, which is putting money or making funds accessible to member states, because actually. Rearmament is up to the member states. It's not something that the European Union at this stage should do or can do. All it can, or the best it can do, is to foster other nations to increase their defense budgets, to purchase more hardware, and what it's doing is, in a way, is acting as a facilitator and is making money more easily available to member states to achieve that. But again, recognizing and admitting that it is up to the nation. So it is actually the European Union as such has not much leeway at this stage to actually transform how European defense is conceived.
One of the core parts of this plan is something called the SAFE Fund. That's 150 billion euro in loans meant to support joint defense projects between EU countries. Now that it's being approved, do you think it can really lead to more coordinated defense efforts. What are the major hurdles still in the way?
Well, the short answer is yes. Well, it will, because in a way, I mean, not completely, but in a way it will, because I think that the situation in the overall situation in Europe, militarily speaking, is so poor that any improving, any injection of money will do. I mean, we desperately need more hardware, more aircraft, more ammunition, etc. So yes, it's going to be helpful. But there are also some issues with this. I mean, in the medium to the long terms. Well, the first thing, there are some technical considerations. One of them is that nations must streamline their purchasing procedures, because if you want to, when nations buy major weapon systems, aircraft, naval platforms, main battle tanks, etc., all this needs the purchasing of these items requires long periods of time. There is a lot of red tape, a lot of processes involved to make sure that money is well spent, etc. These procedures have to be shortened and streamlined to make them more agile. So there is a time between the moment when a nation decides to acquire one weapon system and the time when the weapon system is delivered and ready and operational and in service in the military forces. So this time has to be shortened. Then the second thing is that the European industry, if we rely on it for our purchases, which I think is the EU policy, the industry has to be ready to deliver, and it is not. This time it is not. This is something we have realized during the war with Russia. We were not able to quickly ramp up the production of conventional artillery ammunition, because after reaping the peace dividends after the Cold War, many European nations have dismantled their chains of production of military items, and they have to be rebuilt, and this takes time. So at this stage, the quick fix to that is just purchasing off-the-shelf items, looking for them in the market, in the international market, not necessarily the European one. So America is the United States is the obvious provider. But in the meantime, we have to change this, and we have to ramp up our industrial production, so we are able to produce what the European defense needs. And then there is another interesting item to consider. Another interesting consideration is that there is a tension that has to be solved, because if you read this white paper, the European Readiness 2030, you realize that the European Union has identified several areas in which the European Union sees a weakness. A union, I mean, like a strategic lift, or intelligence, or artificial intelligence, drones, etc. So this is where these are the areas that the European Union feels have to be filled, the gaps that must be closed to put the European defense on a more solid footing. Now, there is a tension between or in member states as to what should be prioritized. Should nations prioritize the fill-up of these gaps, or should member states prioritize whatever they feel is their most immediate need? And also, this tension is a difficulty in the implementation of this plan, which is very positive, as I said.
There's the obvious question of national budgets. Even if there is EU support, the heavy lifting will fall on member states. There's also the idea that EU countries will be allowed to temporarily spend more on defense by relaxing some of the usual budget rules. In theory, that frees up, they say, 650 billion. Do you think countries will actually follow through with that kind of spending, or are debt and public opinion likely to get in the way?
Well, I think some will. Well, I have to start by saying that I'm not an expert on economics, nothing of the sort. But I think doing this is necessary, because otherwise nations will not be able to, even if they have the political will to do it, they will not be able to introduce meaningful increases in the defense budgets, because our welfare networks are so dense that as they are now, they have to be supported by public debt. And you have mentioned the issue of public debt, which is it is a deep concern for the whole European Union, but particularly for some of its members. But it has to be done. So they have to be relaxed if we want to implement meaningful increases in expenditure. Unfortunately, well, I do not favor this, because, or I will rephrase this. I favor that, but only if that comes hand in hand with some reckoning in how we are spending public money at the level of the member states. So we have to reconsider how we are financing, how we are funding our welfare networks, to include the need to spend more in our security, which is a very social expenditure, because sometimes many governments make this dichotomy of the confrontation between social expenditure versus, beans versus or bullets versus butter, or gun versus butter. So I think that those are not opposing poles. The security spending is also social spending. So the picture have to be considered as a whole. Once this is done, then yes, let's relax these fiscal rules, although only temporarily, in as much as it is necessary to reach the desired level of rearmament.
Well, we are already seeing different reactions. Germany and Poland are racing ahead. Italy and Spain are taking a more cautious approach. What do you think explains those differences? Could this divide undermine the idea of shared European defense?
Yeah. Well, I think this happens, as is often the case, for a variety of reasons, right? One of them is geopolitical. Is the sheer weight of geography. So if you go to Spain, I do not necessarily agree with this perspective, but if you think of Spain, geographically is a country which is far away from Russia, and many people in Spain do not perceive Russia as a threat, less so as a pressing threat. Again, I suspend my judgment on this. I not necessarily agree with that, but this is how many people see the issue in this part of the continent. And certainly what I can tell you is that we see what happens in the Maghreb, in the Sahel, as far more pressing than what happens in faraway land in Moscow or Siberia, etc. By the way, we have to also to remember that Russia is well positioned in the Maghreb, in the Sahel, in Mali and all these countries. So I think this is one reason. But also there are ideological reasons, or reasons of ideological nature. In the case of Spain, we have currently, I'm not going into the weeds of that. It's not my intention to talk about politics, but the reality today is that we have a left-wing government which is heavily dependent on radical leftist government. Even the Communist Party is supporting the current government in Spain. And anti-militarism and hyper-pacifism, sometimes from my point of view irrational, is in the DNA of many of these political movements. And this also, I think, comes a long way to explain why we are so reluctant to spend more in defense or to get more engaged. This doesn't mean we are not engaged in the reinforcement of Europe. In fact, I think Spain is a very active country. Within the resources we have, we are very active in participation of Spanish soldiers, ships, aircraft in NATO, UN missions, etc. But this is how different parts of Europe see the problem. Of course, this may have consequences on Europe, on the European Union, and on the project as a whole, because obviously this may breed a feeling of insolidarity, or the sensation of the perception among certain Europeans that some of their partners in the Union are not sympathetic or committed to the mutual defense. And this is one of the consequences. The Poles may feel that we Spaniards are not doing what we should to support them. And of course, if we in the future have a security problem, therefore we should not expect them to reciprocate. And this is very damaging to European Union. So there should be a system by which free riding or feet dragging is prevented, and we all increase our budgets in parallel, hand in hand, really committed and understanding of our other partners' security needs, which are very, very pressing. And certainly, if we don't do this, if we continue dragging our feet and resisting increasing our security budgets, at the end of the day, the United States may finally disengage from our security. Because I think this is actually the issue with the current Trump administration. I do not think Trump is in principle against NATO. And if he is, the security establishment is not. So because I think it should be clear for them that keeping NATO alive is a vital strategic interest of the United States. But you know how transactional Trump is, and if he realizes that we European nations are not doing what we should in defense, then he may fall to the temptation of disengaging, if not entirely, of the whole alliance, at least living or concentrating only in the countries which are truly committed to security, to collective defense in Europe. So that could be another effect, the weakening, even eventually the dissolution of NATO, but not because of Trump's mercurial personality, but because of some European countries' neglect.
There's an obvious interrogation. Can Europe act as one?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would like to think, yes, we are. I mean, sometimes we tend to be too negative when we talk about us Europeans, but we have to think where we stood only 60 years ago. We were 70. We were practicing our national sport, which was warring among one another. So see how deep the transformation of Europe has been in this short period of time, because historically speaking, with historical hindsight, 60 years is nothing. So I think that under the correct circumstances, we should be able to overcome our differences, and we should be persuaded and convinced that it is this or irrelevance. And I think there is no. I mean, I have to confess, I'm not a convinced Europeist. I am a very staunch Atlanticist, but I think that we have no way, no in-between solution. It's either we unite and grow to become regional power with the political will to do something and to shape the rules of the new international order, or we will fall into irrelevance if we are not there already. So I would like to think that, yes, we can achieve that under the correct circumstances. And we don't have to forget that for decades, the correct circumstances meant having the US security umbrella on our side. So to me, keeping the United States aboard and engaged in the European security, it is essential, because I think this is the cement that has kept Europe together. Without US leadership, it is very difficult at this stage. I mean, things may change, but as things are now, I think it is very difficult that European nations are able to agree on a common solution to a security problem. You only have to look at what happened the cases of Ukraine and Gaza. In Ukraine, when the Biden administration clearly sided with Ukraine, the European nations follow behind U.S. leadership. This is an element of the essence. Without this, the European response would have been totally different. Now, in Gaza, now it's different because now President Trump has adopted a different stance. But talking about the late days of Biden's presidency, this leadership was not so obvious. I mean, U.S. was behind Israel, obviously, but for the first time in history with some conditions. And this perception led Europe to be unable to develop a unified common posture on the issue. So, I mean, all this nice story is to highlight the importance that the keeping a robust and strong transatlantic link is, from my point of view, for Europe.
Now, if we zoom out, do you think Europe actually has a common vision for defense?
No, no, I don't think so. I mean, in general terms, we do. We are able to. Well, we have a NATO strategic concept. It's agreed. Of course, not all European nations are NATO nations, but by and large, most of them are. We have this strategic concept. The strategic concept defines threats, challenges, vulnerabilities, etc., and those are agreed on by all the signatories. We have also nice security strategies in the European Union. This is true. We have this level. We agree on this, but the devil is in the details, as usual, right? And in reality, this keeps concealed a lot of differences, nuances in perceptions, friction, etc. So we have different souls within the European Union. We have mostly the Eastern European nation, not all of them, but most of them, plus Anglo-Saxon or Northern European nations like the United Kingdom, Denmark, Scandinavians, etc., which are deeply Atlanticist. And we have other sensitivities within the European Union. As the case in point is France. So, there is a clear gap between these two kinds of countries in the European Union, which makes common action harder, more difficult. On top of that, again, geography plays a role. And I referred before to Southern European nations and the Sahel. Well, that's a reality. You have countries like Spain, France, Italy, which are more concerned with whatever may come from Burkina Faso, Chad, Libya, etc., than from whatever comes from Russia. And even if at the rhetorical level, NATO pronounces that European security is indivisible and it has to cater to 360 degrees, the reality is that the US agenda is predominant in the alliance and NATO is very much concentrated in tackling the problem, the eastern problem, and certainly I'm not saying it is neglecting the southern flank, but my concern is that it is not being given the same level of attention. Probably it makes sense, it's reasonable, but it is also a fact. And this is a perception that some European nations share. So we cannot say that there is a shared, agreed view, 100% agreed view on security in the European Union. On top of that, you have the particular security concerns of a country like Spain. We have a concern with what happens in our particular relationship with Morocco. And it's something that I think it is for us, Spaniards, to solve. It's something, the solution of which we cannot totally rely on our partners or even on our allies in NATO. So the answer to your question, the simple answer is no, there is not a common perception on security.
So we will have to find a way to get past this utopic perspective and go beyond the national strategies dressed up in EU language, right? Part of the plan is about building more autonomy in things like missile defense, drones, and cyber security. How
Mhm.
realistic is that goal? To what extent are we overestimating what Europe can do on its own in these areas?
Yeah, I think we are overestimating a little bit too much. I mean, again, as I said before, in the immediate time frame, there is a lot we can do because we have to start from almost from scratch. Not exactly, but because we have been for so many time neglecting security, our starting level is low. So we have to start by growing. No matter what we buy, it will be welcome. So, I mean, the European Union has identified these areas you have mentioned, missile defense, drones, cybersecurity, but there are others, intelligence, artificial intelligence, strategic lifts, strategic enablers, etc., that are also very necessary if we really want to have a autonomous European defense. There are many obstacles to that, and again, the weight of national policies and national interest is relevant here. You know, just to cite just an example, we in NATO we have an air defense anti-aircraft and ballistic missile defense system, which is pooled among all NATO nations, which is supported by, the backbone is our US military forces. This is an air defense security shield. And now there is Germany came up like a couple of years ago with a project it called European Sky Shield Initiative, which was a project to build a purely European air defense system based on a certain technology, which included US technology, German technology, of course, and Israeli technology, because part of the components of this shield were or had to be bought in Israel, because were Israelite missiles. This project has found a significant echo in Europe, but France is conspicuously absent from the project. Why is that? Well, my guess is that there are commercial, industrial interests behind. It's because France fears its technology may be discriminated against the technology of other countries. So these are the kinds of obstacles that European defense has to overcome if it really wants to grow of age. So this kind of thing. So again, it's always a matter of having the political will to do that. If you have the will, you will find a way. In fact, I would say that at least since 2014, when the Mogherini document was released, we Europeans have been moving in the right direction. And we have agreed to put in common our defense planning, to identify gaps, redundancies, etc. We have embedded in the Lisbon Treaty the PESCO, which is the Permanent Security Cooperation, which is a mechanism. From my point of view, I'm not an expert on EU right, but I think it's a mechanism which is underutilized, it is underdeveloped, which is meant to increase the levels of cooperation and military integration for countries which are willing to go to follow that path. But it is being used as a system to start shared projects, research and development projects, which eventually had to transform in weapon systems to furnish European military forces. So we are doing a lot of things in the European Union. We are putting the building blocks to a future European defense, but I think there is still a long way to go.
The European Commission also wants to involve private investors to help finance the rearmament effort. That's new territory for the defense world. What are the benefits and risks of turning to the private sector in this way?
Well, I don't know exactly if you mean private funds, private companies funding the purchase of military hardware, or if you're talking of a different thing. I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit.
I don't mean anything. It's a question
Okay, just a question.
that come up, and I don't know how to interpret that. So
Okay,
maybe you can shed a light on this and explain.
correct. Okay, if you mean this, if you mean private actors funding the purchase of equipment, I would be very wary to do that to this, because this philanthropy comes with, or may come with, strings attached, and states have to look for the common good, not for the good of any private actor. Probably what you mean, and this is something that actually is happening, is necessary, and I think is positive, is that in certain, at least in certain niche capabilities, we need the engagement of the private sector. That's a reality. I mean, if we are thinking of cutting-edge technology, we need this. Think of the internet. Internet is know-how in IT technologies is not in the hands of governments. Or if you think of outer space, the know-how is no longer in the hands of states. Look at the United States. You know that Elon Musk is responsible, I think it's Elon Musk, SpaceX, has been tasked to resupply the International Space Station, the ISS. It's something that traditionally was one of the NASA's tasks, but is now in the hands of a private company, because that private company is able to do it as a very far cheaper than if a public agency did it. So it is also a way to streamline expenses. So it is necessary to engage them. The main experts on information technology are not working for governments, are working in the private sector, and the public sector in no nation, I think, can compete with the private one in salaries, in attractiveness, etc. So it's not as attractive as the public sector. So we need their cooperation to increase our resilience, our responsiveness. It's not necessarily the funding, but it is the cooperation with the private sector in all these areas, also to set the rules, to enforce the rules, etc. Because the enforcement of the rules is not entirely in the hands of governments. And I think this might be the sense in which the contribution of the private sector is not only acceptable, but desirable and necessary from my point of view.
I can't help but look back in history and correlate the economic booms that were linked to the rearmaments of different countries. And we can see that in post World War One, when the depression in Germany was overcome by huge amounts of military expenses, and that was followed by war. Now, we can see something a little bit similar happening in Russia, where the rearmament that has led to the Ukraine-Russian conflict was also happening with a big economical boom in Russia, quite a surprising one. So if we have this big rearmament and we have this big expenses, it will probably mean some sort of economic boom in Europe. But that those military expenditures are more often than not followed by violent conflicts. So if we look at the Marshall Plan, it's the economic boom was not caused by rearmament. It was caused by reindustrialization and different things. So how should we mitigate this worry?
Well, actually, I'm not sure I agree with the proposition that we engage in wars because we have been increasing our defense budgets and because we have been rearming ourselves.
So it's not exactly what I was thinking. I was just looking at history and what happened. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if we look back, it often happened. So how do we prevent that from happening?
I think the best possible way, quite frankly, is by the value of deterrence. In parallel with whatever diplomatic channels we have to engage to ease tensions. We may argue the United States faces an emerging one, which could be China, right? These moments of transition is what I think was Allison called it to see the strap, because these periods are more prone to friction and to conflict. And I think this is the reason why we perceive that we are on the verge of war. It is not rearmament. Rearmament is the consequence of that perception. But certainly, from my point of view, if we want to avoid an escalation to war, we need to work in parallel along these two lines. One is the rebuilding of effective deterrence, both in the conventional and the nuclear realms. And second, work in diplomatically along diplomatic lines to introduce crisis management mechanisms which prevent the possibility of undecided escalation. During the Cold War, we had that. There were mechanisms between the Soviet Union and the United States to mitigate this possibility. The problem today is that so far we do not have these mechanisms developed to regulate friction between the West, or the United States, if you will, and China. So we also have to work in parallel with our reconstruction of deterrence.
So one of the other reasons invoked for this rearmament is a term that's being used as strategic autonomy. And that often comes up in contrast to NATO. But here's the question: can Europe really talk about autonomy if it's still relying on the United States as its main security guarantor?
It is. Well, the first question I would pose is, do we really want strategic autonomy? Or what do we mean by strategic autonomy? Because if autonomy means the breakup of the transatlantic link, I am against it. I do not want that. I don't think it's a good idea, strategic idea, to sever or to disengage the United States from European security. I think the transatlantic link has given us many decades of peace, prosperity, stability, and I think it's worth keeping. I think we have to do that. So if this is what Europeans or what some Europeans mean by strategic autonomy, I do not want it. What I want is Europe, which is able to talk to the United States on a par, at the same level, but always proceeding and working hand in hand with the United States whenever our interests overlap or are the same. Can we do this now? No, I don't think we can. At this stage, we are not in a position to replace the United States as a main security provider. And again, I don't think this is something we would like to see. I don't think that's a good idea. But we are not in a position. If we want to do this, we need to do a lot of things before. And one of them would be deciding what kind of European military forces we want to have. Are we talking about a European army? Are we soldiers with the European flag? Or are we talking about something closer to what NATO is doing today? In other words, is building a European force but based on national contribution, because we have to agree on things like this, and we have to overcome important obstacles, many of them of technical nature, and to answer questions like who is going to be the commander, to whom this military force is going to be accountable. Is it going to be accountable to the Council, to the Commission? Is it going to have a rotational command and control system? Who's going to fix the priorities in case of conflict and security threats? And not the least issue is, shouldn't we redraft the Treaty of Lisbon, because the Treaty of Lisbon, when it develops the common security and defense policy, clearly limits what a European military had to do or has to do in the future. And that limit was the European lingo called the Petersberg missions, which are limited, are below the level of full-scale war or war fighting. As Petersberg missions are meant for stability, peace building, etc. So we would have to overcome these tricky issues. And again, building a European army is not just buying hardware, it's not even building common military units. Beyond that is changing the mindset, changing the political will to build this institution, command and control. What are we going to do? What are going to be the rules on the use of force, when, where, priorities, etc. So I think this is a very tricky issue.
For some, one of the big drivers behind the Readiness 2030 initiative is the growing concern that the US may no longer be a dependable ally, especially with the political shifts happening in Washington. How do you think Europe should respond to that uncertainty? Do you believe it can genuinely take on more responsibility for its own security, or is that still a distant goal?
I think it's a distant goal, but it's something that has to be worked out, has to be changed. That is very true. We have to take advantage of this window of opportunity to do this. As it's often the case, sometimes you need historical events to introduce a real transformation in a project, and that could be the case in the European Union. So we need to grow. That is clear. But to me, that's independent to what the United States do. Again, we live today in a very regionalized world. We are talking about blocks like the BRICS, which may put together actors like China and India, United States. So either we grow to that magnitude, or again, the European countries piecemeal will be neglected and will fall into irrelevance. So we have to do that with or without Trump. Now, on top of that, now we have this incentive, this motivation with Trump's presidency. But frankly, I think I have said that before, I do not think Trump wants to break NATO. I don't think, he dislikes the alliance, but I think that he understands the strategic interest he should have to keep NATO alive and operational. And I think this is what the United States, the current administration of the United States wants. It's a responsive NATO in which European allies do more for their own security, for their own sake. Because we have to recognize that in this very competitive world we live in now, the United States, not only the US, but mainly the US, has to care now for the more pressing issue of the emergence of China. And that requires, for that to happen, necessarily, we Europeans have to do more for our security. By the way, this is not Trump's complaint. This is something, the request for us Europeans to do more for the benefit of our defense is an old US demand. It has been now highlighted under President Trump, but it is there since many years ago. I think President Kennedy was the first one started to complain about that. Certainly, the pivot to Asia Pacific introduced by President Obama in 2011 was a clarion call for us, because he was expressing the same view that we Europeans, we were not doing enough, and the recognition that the US had to prioritize its effort in the region of Asia Pacific. So again, I think there are reasons to believe that NATO will survive, but it has to change, and it has to change in this sense. And I will finish my statement here. If you remember right after Trump's inauguration, Secretary Hegseth went to NATO headquarters in Brussels, and he made a speech the day before J.D. Vance, the vice president, delivered his speech in Munich. Hegseth had been in the NATO headquarters making another speech on NATO and European security. And it was not very much publicized. It did not draw much attention from the media, but Hegseth said, I'm not quoting him, of course, but something like, the United States remains committed to NATO, but to strong, committed NATO, clearly indicating that they expected us to spend more in defense. So they don't want to dismantle the alliance, they want us to do more for our security.
So I'm not sure if my next question falls more in the category of utopia or dystopia. If the US were to scale back its involvement in NATO or start treating its support as more transactional, what kinds of changes do you think we'd see within NATO itself?
That's an excellent question, Gabor. I don't have the answer, but I can draft some scenarios. Well, one obvious scenario is that this motivates, that catalyzes European or a movement towards more security integration. That could be one of the results. So the US disconnect could be the catalyst of the construction of a real security European Union. That could be one. But the other scenario is the opposite, is that if that happens without any kind of phasing out or without coordination, European nations are going to, will have to look for new security providers, because we do not have meaningful militaries, we do not have nuclear weapons, bar UK and France, so short of having US support, European nations will have to find new providers. Some European nations, I'm thinking of Poland, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, etc., may still use the US as the main security provider. But other nations may find a new provider in places like Moscow or Beijing. I don't think this would be a good development, and I frankly believe this would be the end, of course, of NATO, but also of the European Union as we know it. Probably it could signal the reversion to the old balance of power politics in Europe, because it may become an issue of each man for himself. So I do not have the answer, but I can envisage these two different scenarios. One would be positive, the second would be terrible from my point of view.
In the recent conversations between the United States and Ukraine, one of the main focal point was the natural resources available in Ukraine, especially rare earth. So that's a reminder that wars aren't always just about land. Sometimes they are about what's under it. And there's been a lot of speculation that rare earths and other critical resources in Ukraine are part of what's driving geopolitical interest, especially from the US. How seriously should we take that idea?
Well, call me naive, but I think that, yeah, this is a consideration, certainly, but I do believe that there are other considerations. Yes, the US is interested in Ukraine's rare earths, but frankly, I think that all this was motivated by the rules of the international system must be observed and respected. And the first rule is the respect of the international borders and the respect of the autonomy of nations to decide on how they conduct their internal affairs and the kind of allies and friends they find. And I want to believe that was the main engine behind Europe's intervention in the war in Ukraine. I do believe that it's obvious that there is an interest in the control of rare earths, but I think that for that, the United States must rely more on China. And I think the current trade agreement or agreement on tariffs that China and the United States have made has also to do with U.S. access to Chinese rare earths, because China controls a large chunk of the available rare earths. But I think that American interest in Ukraine's rare earths has also to do, I don't know if more or less, but also to do with the U.S. wanted a compensation, a profit from what the U.S. has already spent for the sake of Ukraine's security. We have several times mentioned here the transactional nature of Trump's foreign affairs, and I think this might be one case of that. We, America, have been investing billions of dollars to sustain you through these 3 years of war. Now we need some return to that expenditure, and this is how we are going to get it. I think there are idealistic motivations also behind that.
Can I push you a little bit on that? Because there were other declarations that seem to suggest that economic factors are influencing or shaping strategic decisions, such as what Trump said about Panama, about Greenland, and about Canada.
Again, I'm not saying they don't exist, Gabor, don't get me wrong. I think they are very important. But in the cases of Panama and Greenland, there are also other considerations. And I think even more important. In the case of Greenland, I think United States has an interest in the island for geopolitical reasons. One reason is that, the Arctic is melting and the north route is temporarily open for commercial ships. And that is going to continue. I mean, if the current climate trends continue, then in the near future, the Arctic Ocean will be open for navigation. And that has commercial importance, but also military one, because there is one country which is positioning itself along the Arctic coast militarily, which is Russia. And then the United States don't want to be caught up short in this new military competition. Also, Greenland is key to the control of a piece of the Atlantic Ocean, which was very important during the Cold War, which was the GEUC gap, Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. This gap was essential during the Cold War, and in view of the current Russian assertiveness, it is in the Arctic particularly, it is growing again in importance. So that's another factor. And the third factor is that it will reinforce the control of the Arctic route, which is the route that traditionally have intercontinental missiles used to attack eventually the United States or vice versa, from the United States and Canada into Russia. So yes, there are economic interests, but I think these geopolitical interests or military security interests cannot be neglected. And in the case of Panama, there is an obvious commercial interest, but there is also a concern that China, which was in the process of controlling the ports of access and exit to and from the Panama Canal, could close in the future the canal to U.S. civilian and military traffic. This is a no-go for the United States, but not only for the economic profit point of view, but also for the military point of view. So yes, there are, and we can mention many other cases in which economic interests, which are very important, we have to recognize, are intertwined with others that are of nature.
It seems to me that all these issues will undoubtedly lead to more political friction. With defense budgets going up, do you see that changing how power works inside Europe? Will countries like France and Poland gain more influence because of their military investments?
Yeah, I think so. Well, in fact, this is what the current president, Macron, is trying to do. I mean, we have to remind the two, to me, seminal speeches at La Sorbonne, in which President Macron delineated what he saw as the future of the European security. I think those two speeches are very interesting to read. He has been currently in the Shangri-La dialogue. He has been in Greenland. I mean, he is promoting France as the leader of the future Europe. In this leadership, obviously, military or hard power plays a significant role. And this is why France is willing and ready to do this, because leaving aside the UK, which is no longer in the European Union, is the main military power of it, and is the only nuclear power of the European Union. That's as simple as that. And obviously, Poland, I think, is awakening to this possibility. It was not their intention, but now they find themselves as probably the second military power in Europe, and I'm pretty sure they will want to have a more clear voice in European future. Then you have Germany, so yes. But again, this may also open rifts within the Union, between the Atlantics, the Europeans, the Hawks, the Doves, the North, the South. So it's a path that we Europeans have to tread very carefully, because it may end up ripping the Union apart if we are not cautious.
Yes, political frictions are not north and south, but east and west, and large versus smaller member states.
Absolutely.
This brings us to countries like Hungary and Slovakia. Their caution, some might say their defiance, stands out. Hungary and Slovakia have taken more cautious positions on the Ukraine war compared to most of the EU. What do you think is behind that?
Well, I think I'm going to be a little bit provocative here, but probably you know the answer better than me, Gabor, being or at least having a Hungarian background. I think in the case of Hungary and Slovakia, their current stance toward Russia and Ukraine is rooted in historical events. The fact that at least partially Ukraine was carved out of the detriment of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, took part of the territory of Hungary. This is something that may linger in the imagination of I don't know how many, but some Hungarians. So this may lead them closer to Russia. I don't know. I'm just guessing. In the case of Slovakia, it may be the issue may be fed by a pan-Slavic feeling that may come in contraposition to the weight of the Czech Republic. I don't know. This may be among the reasons that explain their current stance toward Russia. Having said that, I also resist the idea that not aligning with the mainstream political ideas of the European Union automatically puts you on the side of the radical right of the extremist, which is not true. I mean, I discussed that fact. I mean, the fact that politically a government or a political party supports certain values which are not aligned with the mainstream ideas of the European Union bureaucracy does not make them. I mean, I think it is legitimate. It's a part of the game and has to be respected. I think there is in the European Union some tendency to see the ghost of the far right in all these kind of movements, and we have to be alert for sure. But that should not be necessarily the case. And I think those are legitimate views that only prove how difficult it is to build the European Union, because the Union has to accommodate all postures, and with this have to build whatever is possible. Now, this is how I see it. So personally, I'm not too concerned with Hungary's and Slovakia's position on this.
So if we look at their stance, how problematic could that be for EU or NATO's cohesion? Or is it just part of the diversity of perspectives within the alliance?
No, I mean, it is an issue for the cohesion. It is certainly, but the European Union should not come through uniformity of views. This is my point. It is a challenge. Frankly, I do not think it will end up ripping up the European Union. It's something that has to be considered. Many European Union nations would also have to consider why these kind of reactions happen in some countries, and we all together, we need to overcome our differences to find a common way. So I'm not saying that this is irrelevant. No, we have to be concerned. because it is something that, if not threatening the core of the European Union, but certainly it is something that makes harder to move forward wherever we have to go. It is something, it's another issue open for debate, where the European Union should go.
What about Spain? It's cautious too, in a different way, not aligned with Russia, but not racing to rearm either. Spain is in a unique position. It wasn't part of the Marshall Plan or the New Deal, and historically, it hasn't been as tightly bound to US-led defense structures. To what extent does that history still matter today in how Spain approaches European security?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it has a lot to do with that, of course. Well, first, a little nuance. It's true, we were not technically part of the Marshall Plan, but we received the benefit of US aid in Spain. In 1953, Spain and the United States subscribed mutual defense agreement, which is still standing today, by which the United States set up in Spain, well, among other things, the United States supported the rebuilding of the Spanish military, and in exchange, among other things, Spain acceded to accepted the opening in the Spanish territory of US military bases, one of which still open today, one in Rota. So yes, we were not in the Marshall Plan, but we benefited from US assistance. Not only that, the United States also supported Spain to join the United Nations, because until 1955, Spain was considered as a pariah state and was not given the opportunity to join the United Nations because it was not a democracy, etc. It was through the support of the United States that Spain started to join the international institution and the international community. And then at the end of the Franco era, the US assistance was instrumental in facilitated transition to democracy. So this plays a role. In this sense, Spain is indebted to the United States, but it also shapes how many Spaniards see the United States. And I would say that, well, I haven't seen statistics or recent statistics, but I would dare saying that Spain is among the least US supporters in the European Union. I think this is probably the country where supported the United States is the lowest, or close to in the low band, certainly. And this is because among many Spaniards there is the perception that the United States was actually a fillip to Franco's power. Also because I think this is something we have in our nature, we tend to resent power and to align with the underdog, and we see obviously the United States as the most powerful nation, and we resent that. So this conditions our relationship with the United States, which is, I think, is strong, is solid, but it is not devoid of hurdles and obstacles, I think. So I'm not sure I have answered your question, but this is how we see our relation with the United States. And as our role in international security or European security, the truth is that we do not have a very developed conscience of being under imminent threat in Europe. Probably it's because of our geographical position, or it is because of our tradition of isolationism, because as I told you, Spain opened it up to Europe, to international community in 1955, and fully only in the 1980s, so very recently. Traditionally, and after the collapse of our colonial empire, we were inward looking. We were actually isolated from the international community. We did not participate in World War I, nor in World War II, etc. So, and I think that part of the problem with Spain is this. We still have, or many people in Spain have not yet awoken to the reality of the security threats we are facing now in Europe.
So looking ahead, what kind of role do you think Spain could play in shaping Europe's defense future, especially given its cautious stance on increasing military spending?
Well, I have two answers here. One is what I think will happen, and the second is what I would like to happen, which is not exactly the same. What I think is going to happen is that, well, we have limits, certainly. I mean, in our military growth, even if there was a clear political will to do it, the government would have to overcome many obstacles to Spain's rearmament. It would have to reshuffle the whole budget. We have to enter in a path of austerity to be able to finance the expenditure. I think it has to be done, but it will take time. But I think that Spanish society may not have the patience nor the persistence to follow that process to the end. So I think that the moment that pressure in Europe decreases, it will be the moment when not only Spain, I think other countries in Europe, but Spain will try to revert to the old system of low defense expenditure. That's my guess. What I would like to see is Spain that wakes up to this reality, an educated society that it is aware and responsible of the responsibility we have as a big nation in Europe, because I mean, if only by population we are the third or the fourth nation in Europe, and a population which is able to understand how important it is for our interest to be more engaged in international affairs and to try to assume a position of more leadership. I mean, we are not France, we are not the United Kingdom, we are not Germany, but we have a larger role to play in Europe. And this is what I would like to see in my country. Also a country which develops a part of our geopolitical nature, which is neglected from my point of view, and which is the Atlantic side of our nature, of our history. I mean, we have been, historically, we have been an Atlantic nation, a maritime nation, only by chance engaged in continental affairs. Now we have put all the eggs in the basket of Europe, but to the neglect of our relation with America. When I say America, I mean not just North America, but also Central and South America. So this is what I would like to see. And which soul will prevail, I don't know. I would like to see the second one.
But historically, Spain is also a bridge between cultures, the Muslim culture and Judeo-Christian culture. So
that's yes, true.
It plays an important role in that aspect as well.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground: strategy, alliance, national tensions, and even the ethical dimensions of defense. But before we close, I'd like to step back for a moment. Looking at the bigger picture, what do you think this moment in Europe's security history really calls for? Not just from states, but from societies.
I think it calls for us growing to the occasion, quite frankly, and realize what I have said earlier is that we are, regardless of our nationality, we are Europeans. And we have to grow to the occasion and to understand that either we move forward to more integration and to build truly European political entity which is able to compete and to help forge more or a better international system, or we will have to face the consequences of that. So I want to be optimistic, and I would like to motivate and to invite Europeans to go the extra mile to let that feeling grow. I mean, we have to overcome our national differences. We have gone a long way in this, but we still have to move forward and faster, I think. So a future of hope.
We often think of defense policy as the domain of generals and ministers. But there's also the generational angle to this. How do you think younger Europeans should be engaging with these issues?
Well, I think that they have to be actively engaged. I'm not convinced they are. But I think it's only a matter of time until they realize that we have to tackle these issues. But as it is now, I think they are not aware of the historical moment they are living. I mean, I'm teaching in Navarra, I'm teaching international security, and I always like to tell my students, pay attention to what's going on today, because you are witnessing history unfold before your eyes. You are living historical moments. So you have to wake up to this reality. But the young generation, they seem today to be more concentrated on other issues.
So from your interactions that you have with this younger generation, what do you think they might do differently from previous generations?
I think my impression is that at least a part of them are better prepared than our generation. They are more, at least thinking now of Spain, they are almost more European than Spaniards. I think this new perspective, they have to bring it to bear for the benefit of the European process. And I think this is a good thing. And this is something that our generation did not have. Now, I always like to remember that I left Spain for the first time when I was in my 30s already. Now, the new generations, they grow with the idea that they are not only Spaniards, but also Europeans. You know, sometimes I reflect on these Erasmus scholarships. Many people believe they are a waste of money, a waste of time, but I think they are very positive because they are helping to create this supranational identity, and they open the eyes of young generations to others' views, to other perspectives, to understand them, to be more tolerant, and this is a wealth that the previous generation did not have. So this is something that probably they have to teach us, and they may bring to bear to move the whole process forward.
Strategic autonomy, rearmament, NATO, realignment, they are all big issues.
Big issues.
But underneath them are questions about values and direction.
Correct.
What kind of Europe do you think this process is shaping, or maybe failing to shape?
Well, I think it has to shape a Europe which sticks to its traditional values. And we should not fall to the temptation, because now, that today the liberal order is under pressure, is challenged by ideas that propose that the system is obsolete, is not responsive, is not able to give answers to the needs of ordinary people. The system has been tested by crises like COVID or like the financial crisis of 2008. And many people have lost their trust in the system and are starting to believe that embracing more illiberal forms of government would be better for them and for everybody. I do not buy into that idea, and I think that the same values that made us great in the past are the same values that will make Europe a force for good in the future. So respect to individual freedom, tolerance of the difference, all these values, to me, indelibly associated with the Judeo-Christian tradition of Europe, should be kept, promoted as the best guarantee to make Europe, which is great, respected, and as I said, and this is key, a force for good, for international peace, stability, and prosperity.
This takes us to my last question. What is it we're not talking about, but we should be?
In terms of security, you mean
in terms of things that are dear to you, related to the topics that we've covered or not, something that you think, oh, well, that should deserve our attention more and we're not talking about it?
Well, I think that we could have talked about the European Union should relate to China and certainly to Russia, if not now, in the future, at least in the future. I mean, it is true, we have extensively discussed Russia as a threat to European peace, the tension Russian assertiveness provokes in Europe, etc. But the truth is that we Europeans, we cannot wish Russia away. Russia is going to be there. It's going to be our neighbor, whether we like it or not, today, in the future, with or without Vladimir Putin. So I think that sooner or later we will have to find a common posture on how to relate to Russia in the future. And I think that in the near future or in the midterm, probably after Putin era, we will have to reconsider a war map with Russia for the sake of balancing the power of China. If China eventually grows as the global threat to us that many people believe it will be. If that is the case, then I think we will have to find some kind of accommodation with Russia. But I mean, I think this could have been an issue interesting to explore.
Yes, well, that maybe for another occasion we'll talk about. We'll cover different topics. Thank you very much, Salvador, for your time.
It was my pleasure.
And for this very interesting conversation.
Well, I have enjoyed very much. I hope this is useful and it has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.